presentation will be over social cognition and web-based interactions, as well as a cultural study on Burma. First question we're going to ask ourselves is, what is social cognition? Well, social cognition is the process of perceiving others and the cognitive strategies that we use for understanding a broader social world. So, for example, the first impressions that we make when we meet someone new, or the judgment of people that we see interacting in the environment that we're currently in. It's also our perception of political candidates and how they interact in our government, in our world, such as how we see them in TV and in their advertisements, or how we see them interacting on a day-to-day basis. The internet has changed the way our social development works, as well as our social cognition. So, research shows that the typical human cannot maintain more than 150 relationships. This goes for a face-to-face interaction. But on average, a person has about 338 friends on Facebook, because social networking has broadened our ability to maintain relationships with people that live further away from us, or people that we don't get a chance to see as often. It breaks the barriers of traditional face-to-face interactions that we have. So rather than having to plan time to go meet with someone to ask them about their day or have a face-to-face conversation with them, we're able to interact online, and we're able to stay updated with their life and their ongoings within their day-to-day world just by looking at Facebook or looking at their social media. Our perceptions of face-to-face impressions with people don't differ too much from online first impressions. We still use some of the same theories or strategies that we use online versus in person. So if we open up someone's Facebook page and there is a smiling picture of someone, it's very similar to meeting someone in person and them having a smile. But that's not necessarily always how that person is. So it's kind of a maxed impression of someone. It's kind of a facade. But that also is kind of how social networking is. People aren't always going to post the negative aspects of their life. They're only going to post the positive. So we kind of have a warped view of people, and we get a warped impression of someone's life. So for example, someone who's in a bad relationship isn't going to post all the bad details about that relationship. Instead, they're going to post the good stuff. And that's not always the impression that we're getting when we're meeting people. How does culture affect our social cognition? So how do we perceive people based on our cultural upbringing? It definitely affects how we look at people, because we're not used to different cultures. We're not aware of how a culture may interact with each other. So our upbringing in a certain culture may lead us to perceive others in a different manner. So an appearance may vary by culture, such as in Muslim communities, it is common for Muslims to cover up their bodies, especially with women. They wear the full head gear and the full body gear. And that's not normal for us in America, where we have the ability and the freedom to wear shorts and a tank top. But the way we look at them is that they might be weird because they cover up their bodies. And the way they look at us is they might feel offended that we're showing so much skin. This also goes for gestures in different cultures. So in British culture, to do the peace sign is like giving someone the middle finger in America. These gestures are just normal for who we are in a culture, but other cultures, it's not normal to them. It varies culture by culture. The same thing goes for verbal phrases. So in America, when we see someone, we say, hello, what's up? In England, they say, how are you? How you doing? That is the same as what's up. I chose to study the Myanmar culture, also known as the Burma culture, or Burmese people. It's a British Indian province that was originally founded by Britain. The Myanmar community established its independence in 1948. And recently in America, we've seen a surge of refugees who have fled from their country after an attack by a terrorist organization called ARSA. I am currently a law enforcement officer in the state of Tennessee, and I chose to study this culture because we have a lot of Burmese community within our own community, within the town of Smyrna. And we often see the Burmese people infiltrate our law enforcement community because their culture differs so differently from ours, and they're not used to our laws and our ways of doing things. So in America, it's okay for us to touch someone's head or their face. It's not offensive. Oftentimes we'll ruffle up a little kid's hair, or we'll touch someone's face if we're in an intimate relationship with them. But in Burmese culture, that's very offensive because their head is considered sacred and it should not be touched. In America, we shake hands. Men and women shake hands. But in Burmese culture, it's not common for them to shake hands because they believe touching each other is somewhat of an offensive gesture. Instead, they bow their head or they smile at each other. It's especially offensive for them for men and women to touch each other. This also goes for a public display of affection. Men and women will not hold hands even if they're in a romantic relationship. Also in American culture, Americans use utensils to eat, but Burmese people use their hands to eat. One thing I have noticed, which I'll flip to the next page here, is the idea that their head is sacred and their feet are dirty definitely portrays into how I've seen Burmese culture. They don't often wear shoes. They walk around town barefoot. But their cleanliness kind of shocks me, the fact that they believe that their head is clean and their feet are dirty, and that they use a different towel to wash their head or to dry their head than they do their feet, because they're somewhat dirty in our sense, and that just goes for the perception of social cognition. What we perceive to be dirty, they may perceive to be clean, or they may perceive to be normal. They don't use deodorant, so they often have a body odor to them. One of their cultural norms is to handle their own business between each other. So they don't meddle in other people's business. They don't call law enforcement on each other. And so therefore they handle their own business, and they often get into fights because of this, and that's why we see them in law enforcement. I have also had an experience with a lot of Burmese people who drink a lot of alcohol, and I believe, in my perception, is that that's not something that they're used to. So they see this new commodity and they're drinking alcohol, but they're not used to it. They're not used to the way their behavior changes when they drink alcohol. So that's really my perception. The only thing that really shocked me was the fact that they believe that their heads are clean and their feet are dirty, and because of that, their cleanliness really was the biggest thing for me. I have seen that they're a little more closed off. They don't necessarily touch other people. They definitely do smile a lot and bow their heads to say hello. That is something that I did notice and was reaffirmed in my study of the Burmese culture. So these are my references, and that's my presentation. Thank you.